Should business leaders be worried about cybersecurity more today? Do you trust current cybersecurity measures? I'm your host, Yong from Core Strategies, powered by Sales Acceleration. Today we have Tony Chiappetta. He's the president of CHIPS, an established cybersecurity solutions provider based in White Bear Township, Minnesota. With over 2 decades of experience in the industry, Tony is a Microsoft certified professional and has continuously pursued ongoing education to stay at the forefront of cybersecurity advancements. Recently, Tony has taken on the challenge of re-engineering a product initially intended for the use of the U.S. federal government. Through his expertise and innovative approach, he successfully designed an implementation and delivery model that was now effectively used in small and medium commercial spaces.
You're listening to Scaling Up, a podcast for business leaders.
Tony, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. And, reading your credentials, I'm really curious if you could kind of walk us through your background and how it shaped your current approach to business and scaling and also to cybersecurity.
Thanks, Yong. Great to be here. Thanks for having me. So the history is a little bit different than what you might expect from, say, your normal technical person. I grew up around technology, so it was always something that came naturally to me. But instead of going that route originally for a career, went to school for law enforcement, was all ready to get a job at St. Paul, and at the last minute decided to go into business management. So was able to kind of see how the business world worked and, how to run a successful business. And after 10 years of doing that, kind of combined those experiences and jumped it back into the technical arena, really helping small businesses in the start of 2000, where computers were really starting to wind up in the small business environment. People were at that point just trying to figure out what to do with them, right? It was super new. They heard about all the potential that it might unlock, and originally CHIPS was established to really kind of take those new capabilities, put them into use, and help businesses move forward. And as you might remember, technology has changed rapidly over the last couple of decades, and so has CHIPS. We went from helping users understand the computers and get value from it to working with the business owners holistically across their organization, making sure that not only were things kind of working the way they wanted, but they were safeguarding themselves from losing data, getting their data compromised, that kind of a thing. And we really continued to evolve into not just computer management, but broader infrastructure management. And security has always been a concern. You hear about ransomware and you hear about all these large attacks that happen. Small businesses are actually attacked way more often than the large enterprises that you hear about. So, that small business that gets hit with ransomware, or they come in the next morning, all their machines are down and their data's gone, they're pretty much out of business. You can't recover from something like that, especially now statistically that it's costing more than $5 million to respond to some kind of event like that. So the, our focus now with the AppGuard solution is to actually help prevent those kinds of things from happening. It sounds like a weird thing, but up until the AppGuard solution, when it was invented 10 years ago, everything was always after the fact. After that attack had started, there's devastation, the bomb has gone off, and you're trying to contain that blast radius. Everything was after that bad guy has gotten in and gotten your information. With AppGuard now, it's the only solution that's completely, designed to be 100% preventable. So pre-detonation protection, meaning, your employee comes across a landmine, and no matter how many times they jump up and down on it, it's not going to blow up. So that you don't have to worry about, that employee, compromising the data, the environment, and all of the ramifications that, happen if somebody, just clicks on the wrong thing.
Yeah. I didn't know you had a law enforcement background. And when you were in law enforcement, did you decide to start your own business and call it Chips, like Chips the Show with the cops from from California. Uh, it just came to my mind, and by the way, I love that show. And law enforcement is a great background to um, really engage in cybersecurity. It's all about protection,
Yep.
And it seems like if that's your background, it comes from your core. Um, so, were there any recent events that really happened the past couple of months that really stands out in your mind and how it affected people in general? Or if you had, a client that could have been paralyzed, but fortunately, uh, with your help, he was okay.
Yeah, a few different questions there. Let me just clarify. I completed the schooling for law enforcement. I didn't actually start on the job. So, and the Chips name was kind of a family nickname. Growing up, I had that playing soccer. Found out later that my dad had the same nickname and actually had started a company called Chips, when I was first born. So I don't know, kind of runs in the family unknowingly.
Nice.
So, but yeah, there's been a lot of devastation, and whether you're talking, the CrowdStrike situation that impacted people around the world for a period of time is very, very visible. To some things that are not quite as visible, the hospitals getting hit every day with ransomware. They're turning into major catastrophes. Those are probably, I would say, the most devastating, right? Because it's, aside from the disruption and inconvenience, definitely if you, have, I don't know how many millions of people trying to, travel, via airplane, and suddenly they can't, that's pretty bad. But, last year when we, publicly announced commercial availability of AppGuard, I highlighted a hospital system, not just a single location, but, I think that it was 16 different hospital locations and over 100 clinic locations. So, hundreds of locations, 5 different states, that kind of thing. And the disruption there wasn't just, inconvenience for the employees. They actually had like patients lining the halls for, not just hours, but days waiting to get seen. And the patients that were already in there when it occurred, you had things like, hey, we don't know, what medicine this person's supposed to be taking at what dosage. We don't know what like allergies they might have to other medications. So you're kind of, lost at, are we going to do something that's going to harm this patient that came in for help, right? And it just causes a really big problematic scenario. And, there's been scenarios in the past where patients, have not lived through that situation because they were trying to get care and they couldn't. Typically, when that situation happens, you've got emergency, medical situations via ambulance that are redirected to other parts of the city or state because now you can't service that person. And what's the impact, in extending that, time until care is able to be provided. That kind of situation is pretty critical when you're talking about, the care of, thousands and thousands of people, especially the ones that need immediate care, emergency type things. That whole paradigm was really what inspired me to help, bring this technology to the forefront in the commercial scenario. Because again, everybody thinks that, you were just at the mercy of the bad guys and it's just going to happen, where, 12 years ago, the U.S. federal government identified that after the fact is too late. How do we prevent this from occurring? And, it wasn't an easy feat, but after a year and a half, 2 years of engineering and testing, AppGuard was born to prevent those kinds of things from occurring. And it's been able to do so since its rollout into production, and now available commercially. It's, a hospital, a small business can avoid that kind of attack from occurring.
Yeah, and I think hospitals and large organizations, they are always on the news about getting hacked, and and I'm sure they have measures of protection. But I was amazed when I was, as a fractional chief revenue officer, I was engaged with a cybersecurity company, and his focus was small and medium-sized physician practices. And I was completely amazed of the lack of knowledge and protection they had. And you're talking about physician practices where there could be a dozen physicians and some of the larger ones, and they're treating hundreds of patients, and the primary physician or a specialist, they're always the one that recommends the type of care that a person gets. So you mentioned about medication. I mean, medication, health plans for them to get better. I see my primary physician a couple times a year, and he's got a plan for me because he always wants me to get better. If I lost all that and came back to, uh, to the baseline, they would have to go through all that testing again to reestablish, where I was when it comes to my health. That would be terrible. That would be terrible. And I think your service that you're providing could really help some small, medium-sized people, small, medium-sized companies, particularly in healthcare. But there's probably a variety of other industries that you can make a significant impact.
Yeah.
So when it comes to small and medium-sized businesses, do you have any advice to kind of share with some of the listeners, just so, on an educational standpoint, a few things that they should be aware of and look into to see if they are protected enough, or, as you said, proactive enough with their cybersecurity?
Yeah. So there's lots of different aspects to cybersecurity. It's data is almost, many different places now, whether you're talking cloud storage, whether you're talking, backed up onto a USB drive or somewhere else, there's probably a copy of it on a computer, that kind of thing. So there's so many things that organizations need to be thinking about. The one thing that, maybe just to set the base of where we're talking from is that a lot of organizations don't realize that data that they're entrusted with is actually their responsibility to protect, no matter where it's stored. So, you send it off to, Microsoft or, Amazon or whoever in the cloud. It's still your responsibility to make sure that data doesn't get compromised, even though it's at a third party. And so thinking about, using that as the lens as you're looking at different solutions is probably the best mindset to have when you're doing that. But from a internal day-to-day kind of a thing, a lot of computers out there don't necessarily have the right level of protection. So you want to at least have an antivirus, preferably one that can be centrally managed, so you can see, are these things working? Are they up to date? Did the license expire? That kind of thing. We've seen, organizations where, a simple thing like, oh, we forgot to renew the license, and now the protection isn't there anymore. Whoops, didn't realize it because, Joe's got a laptop and I don't see him all the time and we never think about it. And, aside from that, there are security updates coming out from Microsoft and all the other software vendors on a monthly basis. And they're not only, giving you kind of new enhancements, but predominantly it's security, patches. They're closing holes that are being either recently discovered, or a lot of times they're actively being exploited. So if you're not installing these, free updates from Microsoft, you're going to have a lot of different openings in the computer. And the most common attacks now don't require the end user to do anything to initiate that attack or have it succeed, right? So, your computer just could be on, it's in the office, not doing anything, and an attacker exploits a vulnerability in the software, and now they're into your network, into the data, and next thing you know, it's all taken advantage of. So, that's, a simple install of the updates is something that you want to be doing on a regular basis, and maybe not day one, because, almost every month things break on day one. So maybe day 5 or day 10, right? Let them kind of figure that out initially. But, that is something that people have to be thinking about, business leaders and kind of that base there. Another kind of basic thing businesses of all sizes need to be doing is employee training. The bad guys are going to try and get their hands on your money every way they can. And it doesn't always come via the computer. It can be a text message nowadays. It could be an email is still pretty common. It could be a phone call even. And you want, it's kind of this fraud awareness scenario that you want your employees to be trained on, know what to be looking for, and second guessing. There's been lots of scenarios where the person that writes those checks and pays bills for your company, the bad guys try to get them taken advantage of. So now when that $5,000 or $50,000 payment that they send out, they think they're sending it to the vendor, but it actually shows up in the PO box of some kind of bad actor, and now you're out that money just because they happen to convince that person to send it to them, whether it was an email or something else that got them deviated from their normal process. So
wow.
Yeah.
Well, I know the past couple of years, just the way we go about working and where we work from has changed because of COVID. And I've worked with clients that have remote employees. And sometimes when they're all working in an office, you can kind of mandate, hey, make sure you do the updates, or you can do the training, which I think those two components are probably key for any listeners to make sure they do the updates. When you have the update and shut down, make sure you update, not just shut down. But the training is key because a lot of times as consumers or employees, we don't know what we don't know. So training is always key. How would you implement a strategy with maybe a dozen or two remote workers where they're not required to go to the office at all? I'll give you an example. My daughter did an internship in an accounting firm, and all the accountants, they all work remote. Now, you can imagine, it's an accounting firm. Like, that's very sensitive data that they're working on, and they're all remote. I think some insight on how to make sure they're okay would be a huge help, because everyone's worried about remote workers because they have them, number one, and number two, they don't get the physical communication or awareness that sometimes maybe CEOs want to give them. But they have to allow them to work remote. So how do you give them the education and awareness that you think is important?
Yeah, the education awareness training it's definitely needed across the board, whether they're at home or in the office. And I would suggest some kind of platform in which the company policy says, at a minimum once a year, all employees need to complete this training, log into this portal, complete the training. Maybe there's a test at the end of it that says, yes, I went through the training and I understand the information presented, kind of a thing, right? And that way, whether it's the business owner or somebody else, in HR, what have you, that can follow up to make sure that everybody did go through that training. That's going to be the, kind of the starting point from an awareness scenario. There's also platforms that not only provide training, but also have kind of regular employee testing, if you will. They're called phishing tests, where, the information that was presented in the training are just the most common emails that are being sent out by the bad guys can be, sent to the employee to see what they do. Do they click on the link? Do they realize that it's something trying to trap them, and they notify somebody as appropriate in their organization? How effective was that training? And kind of reinforcing that through that is always a good thing to do. You probably don't want to do that kind of a test every day. You'll get the employees pretty annoyed pretty quick, but once a month, once a quarter, something like that. And the tactics of the adversary is always changing, right? So if there was something that provided regular kind of, maybe 1 or 2 minute, hey, here's the latest thing you need to be watching out for. And, like you said, people are working from home. They're starting to travel again. Even just being aware of, plugging your phone in at the airport can be devastating, right? You plug it into something that's not an outlet, it's maybe USB. Well, that also gives a data connection to your phone, and an adversary that's tampered with that connection can now access all your data if that's what they're trying to achieve. And, once you plug it in. So it's things like that people probably would never have thought of. Giving them that information and staying up on what the latest trends are is super important. But Yong, you brought up working from home. That's a pretty expansive topic. Do you mind if we dig into that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely, because so many people do it, and they're. I'll give you a perfect example. We all know this. The new CEO of Starbucks, he's working remote. And if he's not working with sensitive data, I don't know who could be. And obviously, I'm sure he's got a certain level of security, but that's a perfect example of the sensitivity of remote workers, of remote executives with the data that they're managing and how it's protected. I think that's a huge topic. But before you get into that, I just had a comment. Do you think it would be wise when you do some training for a small, medium-sized business to actually test by issuing fake emails and see who hits the link? Have you seen companies do that? So it shows, hey, we sent this out to 200 employees, and 30% of them hit the link, and they would have got a virus. Is that part of a tactic for training purposes?
Yeah, it's more that after the initial training, the reinforcement of that, keeping people on their toes. It's something, again, you don't want to probably do every day, maybe not even every week, but once a month, once a quarter. You do want to be testing that and measuring that. A lot of people in more kind of sophisticated information worker type roles, they're exposed to a lot of emails, hundreds a day, right? It just takes one that can get them, to compromise their credentials or their information. And, even though those people probably aren't fans of it, you do still want to be testing them because, we've seen organizations that, our people are way smarter than the average and we don't need to do this, but yet they're the ones getting compromised. So I'd encourage that across the board.
Oh, by the way, Tony, I think I'm very smart and I got compromised. I'm just saying. But Tony, going back to your request, yes, I think focusing a little bit more on remote workers is a huge topic. Any insight that you can provide on helping I work remote, so any advice you can get for me, and I think probably, I'd say with confidence, at least 25% of the people that could potentially listen to this podcast are probably remote. So any insight you could provide would be tremendous.
Yeah, so there's a couple layers you want to look at. One is as from the entity's point of view, and one is as the employee. So let's start at the organization level. You mentioned Starbucks. Fortune 500 companies with a lot of resources, they have the ability to invest in major infrastructure where they could provide certain capabilities to their employees and mitigate some of these risks. But, the smaller businesses that are trying to accommodate their employees' wishes, trying to get business done, serve their customers, probably don't have the same level of resources. But I would say the one thing you want to remember is everybody talks about VPNs, right? You can, connect to the VPN and work remotely, which sounds great. A few different scenarios. VPN technology is relatively old. So it's very, very common. It's very exploitable. Just having a VPN available is kind of like, having a side door on your business and putting a sign above it, employees only enter here kind of a thing. So everybody knows it's there and how they can go. But one thing that maybe people don't realize is that that VPN connection, while it is an encrypted connection from that person's computer to the business network, it's kind of like having one foot in and one foot out, because you're still a computer at that person's home network. And especially if it's not a computer provided by the business, now you're giving that access to an employee computer, that typically just stays at their house. Maybe it's used by other people in the family. And maybe, people are going out to websites, downloading games that might be compromised, other software, right? So you start to really get into a gray area of what's connecting to the VPN. Has that computer been exposed to other things that can now jump into that side door in the business and suddenly have access to everything within the network, that kind of thing? We've heard lots of stories and scenarios where, somebody's working from home, whether it's the salesperson, and they connect from their laptop quick, and now, the home network was compromised, and they jump through that encrypted connection into the employer, that office network where they wanted to get to. And now the attacker's in. They've got a foothold. They can start doing whatever they want just because of one connection, and as well as, home machines connecting into a business network. You wouldn't just plug a random computer into the connection, the network jack in the office, right? That's essentially what you do if you allow people to connect from their personal computers into your VPN. As well as, there's all this IoT type stuff where they're talking security cameras or those home assistant type things, or, lots of different things connected to the networks. And those things make it easy to compromise an organization. We got a call probably a couple of years now or so where the owner of a business had a smart house, so lots of different network attached devices, and was working from home, VPN kind of thing. And I'm not sure how she realized it. Probably saw some weird stuff happening with the house equipment, the coffee makers or whatever was plugged in, but called frantic because her house was totally screwed up electronically, but then got into the business and compromised that network as well. So it only takes one connection there. So you want to be really careful with that, VPN technology, realizing that it is, the connection itself is secure, but remember, it's like a door on the side of your office building that, is accessible if you know where it is and how to get in. So you're allowing, kind of that side door entrance to your network. And if it was me, I would have really clear, rules about how that works. And, we talked about doing updates and making sure the software is set, that kind of thing. Organizations now are going beyond like just the antivirus and maintenance that we talked about. And maybe it's due to new regulations that are either starting to come out or will be in the near future. But they're looking at it a little bit differently from the point of, will this computer only do what we need it to? And how do we ensure that it's not doing things we don't want it to? So at that point, you really start to think, like, could a home computer establish that? Kind of a security framework? Probably not. So you're thinking more of, okay, if I'm going to let my employees work from the house, not only do we need a connection securely to what they need to get access to, but you probably should offer some kind of computer, whether that's a laptop because they have to travel back and forth, or maybe on the road now and then. Maybe it's a desktop, and something that you can ensure that it's only used for business purposes. The data's backed up. It's being updated regularly. It's got your security software on there that you want to have There's oversight from your in-house IT or maybe outsourced managed service provider, those kinds of things to ensure that you don't fall victim like we saw. More than half the businesses were compromised during COVID when everybody was working from home, but it still continues to be a major issue for businesses to contend with. And, you definitely want to try to accommodate people and, allow them to work. And maybe maybe they're traveling to go see customers and do that. You want to do that securely. So a lot of things to think about from that regard. And then from the employee side of things, as I kind of mentioned already, ideally, it's a business use computer only, right? You don't, the rest of the family should have a different computer. I've heard a lot of, even elementary schools as well as high schools now, demanding that their students use a computer for their homework. So you got to either provide that. Some of the school districts around here, at least, are providing computers to students, which is great. They get the, what they need to do, the schoolwork and meet those expectations. But you do want to have that separation there, because we have seen over the last couple decades, oh, my kid logged in and they did this and now the business is compromised. Whoops. So having that taken care of, from a standpoint of, segmentation is great. And also segmenting the network ideally would be the best way to do that. So not just having the computer plugged into your main network, but maybe the business should provide a firewall or some kind of secure access connection that the computer then plugs into, which keeps it separate from the home network. So you don't have a compromised computer or, Internet of Things kind of a device that can, then expose the business computer. Those kinds of things I think people need to be thinking about if they are going to work from home. In addition to having that reliable internet connection, do they have the right, supporting infrastructure to do that securely?
Yeah, that's important and great advice. Probably too much advice, Tony.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a million other things I need to do, but appreciate you kind of outlaying it out there, because it's very useful, because people, again, don't know what they don't know. But switching gears a little bit, when I work with clients and even as a consumer, you have an option to work with other companies, and every company really kind of stands out for a particular reason, because they do things differently. Their value is different. And I'm always trying to help clients establish what their value is. The one thing that caught me with your firm is you're really trying to, re-engineer a product initially that was intended for the U.S. federal government. And that, when I initially spoke with you, that really got me, because when you think of the federal government, that's the last, organization or structure or infrastructure that you want hacked at all. It does happen, okay? But I think when it comes to resources, they probably have a ton of resources to make sure they're protected. Could you tell me and the listeners a little bit more about your re-engineering process and how that's going? Because I think that's pretty unique, and love for you to share your experiences on it.
Yeah, thanks, Yong. So yeah, I think it comes back to, growing up around technology. I always just thought of it as something as part of normal, life. So when I look at technology, I kind of look at things of like, what are the capabilities, and how can we use that best in everyday needs? So while AppGuard, the original use case was to protect that intelligence officer that's away from headquarters, right? So they can't plug into a friendly network, but yet they've got a laptop with sensitive information, and their adversary is not, the run-of-the-mill bad guy. It's actually a nation state, well-funded, adversary that can custom write an attack never seen before to bypass your antivirus and even the latest, endpoint detect and respond. All those kind of detection-based solutions are hinged upon first identifying something bad, right? When you can bypass that, how do you defend? Well, AppGuard was created to prevent. And, we don't work with, intelligence agencies directly. AppGuard still used there. But from a business standpoint, my thought was, how do we, provide this preventative solution to businesses? Like you said, an accountant, a bookkeeper, a smaller organization, they have a lot of sensitive information. Maybe they're working from home, maybe they're in the office, maybe they're, traveling. But how do you make sure that they don't find themselves compromised? And what we're doing is we're taking the core application and really making it suited for consumption by a small business, even one with, 5, less than 10 employees, maybe even, just a couple people, where they understand, like, hey, we're working with our clients' data and we don't want to, this to ever get exposed out on the dark web. We never want to have to call our customers and say, sorry, all that employee data you entrusted us with, or your financial records, the bad guys got it. Hopefully you can call your bank and get that information, locked down. But what we've done is not only talked about the capabilities of the technology, but really asked for feedback from the small business community. And what we found is that there's openness to be, wanting to protect their information, but it's got to be easy to consume, right? It's got to be something that the business can sign on for and know what they're going to get. It also has to be non-disruptive, because last thing you want to do is buy something that's going to either restrict, your normal day-to-day stuff or cause a lot of disruption. And then it's also got to provide the right information as feedback, as well as be affordable. So we worked on that. We proved out that not only the technology is solid and it's going to deliver on its prevention promise, but from a small business, the smaller the organization, the more kind of sensitive they are to, having everything working and that kind of thing, right? So what we did was worked with an organization on the messaging to make sure that all those kind of value propositions were identified and worked into our system and is there present. But the big thing that we've put together is that deployment process for the end consumer, right? Because if we want to make sure that they get the benefit with zero disruption, how do you do that? So we've been able to working through this process, hundreds of times now, create a multi-step scenario where the software gets installed, but it's not doing anything until we have full visibility of the environment. So understanding, Yong, that you've got 10, 15, maybe it's 20 programs that you have to use to do your job. Understanding what those are and those activities allows us to create a profile for you and for all the employees like you with that same software stack to say, hey, Yong's going to do his job with these programs. That's what we want him to do. We don't want him doing something adverse. We don't want a virus telling the computer to doing something outside of that employee mission that we have for Yong, right? So we create this profile. And then not only do we ensure that we've seen everything, but we also then verify. So hey, Yong, your accounting software there, you're going to run an end of the month report. You're going to do some kind of quarterly or annual activity. Why don't you try and do that now and see if your software is going to do something strange? Because, programmers take shortcuts every now and then. So we look for those kind of future disruptions, and then we go and accommodate that if there is some kind of programming thing that we need to be aware of. But once we've gone through and vetted all that out, we've got this profile, this, security policy that says, hey, everybody, Yong and all the employees that match this, we know that they can go out and do their job with the software and the computer we've provided. And now we can enforce that rule set onto the computer. So whether somebody tricks you into doing something you're not supposed to. They send you a file that gets past the spam filter and the antivirus, and it tries to do something. Or even in the scenario, we've seen a lot of this last year in 2023, where the actual software developer gets compromised, and now their program wants to go out and do something it's not supposed to, wants to, siphon out your data and send it to somebody or whatever it's going to do. This security profile is not restricting your behavior. It's restricting what the computer can do, right? It's different. It's not saying what websites you can go to. It's not saying what files you can open. It's just saying like, hey, this computer is only meant to do these things. So even when the software tells it, oh, I want to go do something strange, I want to go, out in the left field and compromise the data and encrypt it or do something, the computers can be like, no, that's not inside of your mission parameters. So we're gonna pretend you didn't ask that, and just
so you're saying to have parameters where they're only allowed to do the work, and that's what they have access to go outside of those parameters. You may need special permission, or you're just not allowed to do it.
Yeah, the computer by default will not execute that request. So, so in the traditional sense, your workday might be illustrated as a hallway. You want to get from one side to the other side, right? And when you're in a detect and respond security environment, that's like having that hallway just lined with every sensor imaginable, metal detector, motion detectors, TSA equipment, like everything imaginable, right? And you're just navigating through this hallway. It might be really slow, but you're doing your thing. And as long as the red light doesn't go off, and suddenly now you're, you've called attention to yourself, everything's okay. In our world, because those sensors can be, kind of run past and be disguised so they don't detect something bad. Our scenario is you walk up to that hallway and it's not open. It's a sealed door. There's, you can't get through that door. And plus there's 2 Marine guards standing outside of it. So you have to show your credentials. You should be allowed inside the hallway. And now that you're inside, the door behind you closes and you're stuck inside of this box with 2 Marine guards watching everything that you're doing, right? So you're able to be inside of that, and as long as you do your job, everybody's happy. As soon as you try to do something outside of it, now you're in trouble, and it jumps in front of that before the request to detonate that landmine or that virus even gets a chance to happen. So as a user, you don't have to be overly conscious. Like you could open that file that comes into your email, looks a little suspicious, but it won't detonate. So it's not the worst case scenario. If it is, you probably want to report it to your superiors or IT. But hey, look at this! Somebody was trying to get my information. It's it tried to detonate, but it can't on your computer because the computer won't allow it. Even if as a user you have an admin rights and you tell it to, hey, open this file for me and let me see what's inside of it. So.
Okay. Well, a last piece of advice from Tony. How do you see cybersecurity impacting executive roles in small, medium-sized businesses? Just to give our listeners a head start.
So it's IT, as I mentioned, early 2000s. It was super new. It was something that the businesses were investing in, and they're trying to get their employees to adopt, right? And over time, it's taken on different forms along that same kind of line. And somewhere in there, as technology has become more prevalent, the reality is that we use technology that we rely on every day, but we don't really understand how it does what it does, right? So it's you pick up your cell phone and you go to make a phone call, or most people don't use it for phone calls now. They use it for apps and they use it for texting and all these, looking up the weather, right? We don't know exactly how that works, but yet we use it. And now as a business leader, the devastation that it could cause to your organization is, you could be out of business when somebody does one wrong move. They click on a malicious link or open a attached virus to an email. So you really have to be looking at, not just, hey, do we have technology and somebody hopefully knows how it works or thinks they do, but it needs to be part of the company culture. The not only the CTO or the IT directors have to understand technology, but the business leaders, the CEO, the COO, the presidents of organizations need to know exactly how those things are happening. And, even as a board member now can be held liable for the outcomes of a scenario that they didn't ask the right questions. Where are we putting this data? How do we know it's going to be secure? What is our vendor doing to back it up, to keep it, safe and sound from attackers? What are employees doing? What do we have in a handbook that tells them what they can and can't do? How are we enforcing that, measuring that? All those kinds of things, as well as the actual technology component, really is becoming paramount, because you're going to see not only businesses going out of business because of an employee that accidentally clicks on the wrong thing, but as the information privacy laws, continue to propagate from Europe into the US and states, and, probably eventually the United States will adopt that. There's going to be fines, like you can't believe, like if you're not doing the basics to even just safeguard the information, that could put you out of business even before you have a compromise. So they really need to start to look at it as an actual core component to their business, not just something that they've, invested in and hopefully it gives them more productivity.
Wow, Tony, this was an incredible discussion. Your knowledge of cybersecurity is very invaluable, and it was obvious. You gave some great advice. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today. And to all the listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to Scaling Up and give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcasting platform. And don't forget to tune in next time, where we dive in more ways to grow your business and navigate challenging scenarios of scaling. I'm your host, Yong Kim. Thank you for listening.